They're threatening to arrest me for trespassing on property I secretly purchased. Diana Harrington just constructed a $12,000 fence around our Pine Ridge Lake access. She's standing there with Sergeant Collins demanding my arrest for endangering community welfare. What would you do if your HOA chairwoman tried stealing your children's swimming spot? Here's what Diana doesn't realize. While she's been playing community tyrant, I've been researching property law. And that land her expensive fence is blocking? I just acquired it from the county for $18,500. I'm watching her confident expression crumble as I present Collins with my ownership documents. Her illegal fence is now trespassing on my property. Where are you watching from? Does your community have a Diana too? Because what I'm about to do next will transform her power fantasy into the costliest error she's ever made. The flavor of justice is about to become very, very satisfying. My name is Ryan Torres. I'm 38 and I've been a master plumber in this city for 12 years. Single father of 2 incredible kids. Sophia's 15 and convinced she understands everything. Daniel's 12 and still believes I'm the smartest person alive. I'm trying to preserve that illusion as long as possible. We live in Pine Ridge, Commons, a planned development built around a natural lake back in 1997. 143 homes, mostly families. The kind of community where children still bicycle until sunset, and neighbors actually recognize each other's names. At least it used to be that kind of community. I purchased our house in 2015 using my father's life insurance settlement. Dad was actually one of the original construction supervisors for this development. Spent weeks walking these woods with his surveying equipment and measuring tools, ensuring everything was positioned perfectly. He always said this lake was the community's heartbeat. That's why he made certain every family would maintain access to it. Every Sunday morning for 8 years, we'd stroll down that trail to the water, me carrying my fishing gear, the kids with their snack packs and whatever novel they were reading that week. Summer meant swimming lessons, Sophia perfecting her diving technique while Daniel practiced floating. Fall meant angling for perch and watching autumn colors change. Winter meant sledding when snow covered the walking paths. That trail wasn't simply access to the lake, it was access to being a family. Then Diana Harrington got elected HOA chairwoman. Picture someone who measures your hedge height and monitors your trash collection schedule to the second. Platinum blonde hair styled into a helmet that never shifts even in strong winds. Always clutching that leather portfolio like it contains the Declaration of Independence. Drives a pearl white luxury sedan with, I'm not joking, HOA boss vanity plates. If controlling behavior had a spokesperson, Diana would be holding the leadership award. Her husband Gary's pleasant enough, but he carries that defeated expression of a man who stopped debating years ago. Just nods and retreats to his garage workshop whenever Diana starts orchestrating her next community enhancement project. Can't blame him. Diana's been chairwoman for 7 years running, mainly because nobody else wanted the aggravation. But somewhere during that time, she forgot she was supposed to serve the community, not govern it. Her favorite expressions are property standards and maintaining excellence, but what she really means is domination. The first warning sign came last spring with her neighborhood enhancement initiative. Suddenly, specific houses needed mandatory landscaping upgrades. Guess whose property got targeted for having a waterfront view obstruction? Namely, the rope swing my father and I had installed for the kids on the ancient maple tree. $750 fine for unauthorized recreational equipment. I can still taste how my morning coffee turned acidic when she appeared at 6:45 a.m., clicking across my driveway in those sharp heels, waving that violation notice like a battle flag. I should have recognized then that this was merely the opening move, but I paid the penalty, removed the swing, and assumed that would conclude the matter. The sound of my children asking, "Why can't we have our swing back, Dad?" should have been my alarm bell. That evening, I began studying HOA regulations. Call it instinct, call it suspicion, but something warned me Diana Harrington was just beginning. 3 weeks after the swing incident, Diana convened an emergency board session. By emergency, I mean she distributed notices at 5:30 p.m. on a Friday for a Monday evening meeting. Genuine emergencies don't accommodate convenient scheduling, but apparently Diana's version of crisis management operates during business hours. The subject: security concerns at the lake access area. I attended to find Diana at the head of the community center table, surrounded by her usual allies, Jennifer the secretary, documenting everything like she's recording the Emancipation Proclamation, and Paul the treasurer appearing like he'd prefer dental surgery. About 15 other homeowners scattered around, those uncomfortable metal folding chairs that squeak whenever you move. Diana launched into this theatrical presentation about liability risks and insurance mandates. She'd even prepared visual aids, a manila folder supposedly containing official reports recommending we restrict unsupervised access to common water facilities. "The insurance company is absolutely clear," she announced, flourishing papers like courtroom evidence. "We need immediate safety barriers to protect the association from litigation." Here's where things became interesting. I raised my hand, polite as possible, and requested to examine a copy of this insurance report. You know, the one that was supposedly so urgent, it demanded an emergency meeting. Diana's perfectly applied lipstick compressed into a thin line. "The board will review all pertinent documentation and make appropriate materials available after proper consideration." Translation: "How dare you question me, peasant? But I'm a contractor. I deal with insurance companies, safety codes, and liability issues daily. So the next morning I contacted our HOA's insurance provider directly. Took exactly 5 minutes to confirm what I suspected. No such report existed. No safety evaluation, no new mandates, nothing. That's when I really studied those regulations. I'd been reading. Turns out Diana had violated at least 4 different rules with her little emergency meeting. HOA bylaws require 45 days notice for any modifications to common areas. Emergency powers only apply to actual hazards. Burst pipes, storm damage, real emergencies. Not Diana's fabricated crisis. But here's the beautiful part. I didn't just get angry. I got systematic. I spent the next week visiting door to door with a simple questionnaire. Not some official petition that might intimidate people. Just a neighbor asking neighbors what they thought about restricting lake access. 92% opposed any restrictions. Even some of Diana's regular supporters began questioning the proposal. The aroma of fresh printer toner filled my garage as I made copies of everything. The survey results, the bylaw violations, photographs of our children safely enjoying the lake for nearly a decade. I documented everything with timestamps, witness statements, and cross-references that would impress a legal assistant. Diana's response was predictable. She dismissed all objections as troublemaking by a disruptive minority and scheduled the official vote for the Wednesday after Memorial Day weekend. You know, when half the families with children would be squeezing in one last vacation before school ended. She conveniently forgot to notify about 25 homeowners about the rescheduled date. Funny how those 25 happened to be the ones who'd expressed concerns about her proposal. The vote passed 4-1 with Paul abstaining, but Paul looked like he wanted to disappear under the table while doing it. Diana smiled that victorious smile and announced that temporary safety barriers would be installed within the week. The taste of betrayal was bitter as I watched our neighbors file out, most unaware they'd just been bulldozed by parliamentary manipulation and selective communication. But I had documentation proving the meeting was improper. Every violation, every procedural shortcut, every convenient oversight was now part of an official record. As I walked home that night, my boots crunching on the gravel path I'd soon lose access to, I was already planning my response. Diana thought. She'd won. She had no idea the game was just starting. Friday morning, 5:45 a.m. sharp. I was 30 miles away on a job site, wrestling with a stubborn water heater when my phone started buzzing with messages from neighbors. "Installation crew at the lake, they're building a fence, where are you?" By the time I returned home that afternoon, it was finished. 10 feet of ornamental steel fencing stretching across what used to be our community trail. Professional installation, concrete foundations, the works. And right in the center, a single gate with a bright new padlock. The sign posted beside it made my blood pressure spike. Lake access by reservation only. Contact HOA board for scheduling. 72-hour notice required. 72 hours notice to walk to a lake in my own neighborhood. Diana was watering her rose garden when I pulled into my driveway, humming some melody like she'd just won the jackpot. She gave me this little finger wave. Not friendly, more like royalty acknowledging a subject. "Safety first, Ryan," she called out sweetly. "I'm sure you understand." What I understood was that I needed to investigate deeper. Ting. That's what determination smells like. At 7:30 p.m. on a Friday, the clerk was this patient older woman who probably dealt with frustrated homeowners daily. I explained what I needed: original subdivision plat maps, anything showing the lake access designation. She disappeared into the basement archives and returned with a gold mine. The original 1997 subdivision agreement was fascinating reading. My father's construction notes were still attached, written in his careful supervisor's handwriting. And there it was, clear as daylight. The lake access path was specifically designated as a permanent community easement. Not just a convenience, not just a privilege, a permanent legal right. But here's where it got interesting. Dad had made detailed notes about negotiations with the original developer. The lake access wasn't just included as an afterthought. It was a selling point. A promise made to every family who purchased a house here. Natural lake access for all residents in perpetuity. Perpetuity. That's legal speak for forever, in case Diana needed translation. I made copies of everything. 52 pages of legal documents, surveys, and correspondence. The next morning, I organized an emergency community meeting of my own, posted notices on every door, sent emails, made phone calls. If Diana could call emergency meetings, so could I. 47 neighbors showed up, biggest HOA gathering in years. I brought coffee and bakery donuts, nothing fancy, but the smell of fresh caffeine and sugar helped ease everyone's frustration. I spread the original plat maps across 4 folding tables, pointing out the permanent easement designation. So this easement was part of every deed when we bought our houses? Asked Detective Martinez, retired police investigator, sharp as a blade. That's correct. It's legally protected. And the HOA board just ignored that, apparently? That's when Diana showed up halfway through, Gary trailing behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. She stood in the back with her arms crossed, that practice smile getting tighter by the minute. When I finished presenting the evidence, she stepped forward. "The board has already made its decision based on proper legal consultation," she announced. "This meeting is irregular and has no standing." That's when Paul, the treasurer, did something that surprised everyone, including himself. He cleared his throat and said, "Actually, Diana, I don't remember seeing any legal consultation about permanent easements. You could have heard a pin drop." Paul had just contradicted the Queen in public. Diana's composure cracked just enough to reveal what was underneath. "Once property assessments stabilize, we can revisit this issue," she snapped. Then she caught herself, but it was too late. Property assessments stabilize? After what? I looked around the room and saw the same question in everyone's eyes. That's when Rosa Martinez, the kindergarten teacher who lived 3 streets over, raised her hand. "Diana, are you planning to sell your house?" "That's none of anyone's concern," Diana shot back, but her face had gone 2 shades paler. The meeting ended with more questions than answers, but I'd accomplished what I needed. The community was beginning to see through Diana's safety justifications, and Paul had shown there were fractures in the board's unity. As people filed out, Mrs. Chen, who'd lived here since the original development, pulled me aside. Her voice was quiet but firm. She asked me about selling 7 months ago, wanted to know if I'd consider a cash offer from a motivated buyer. Suddenly, Diana's campaign wasn't about rules or safety. It was about money. And if she was working with buyers or investors, that changed everything. If I thought Diana would retreat after being exposed, I seriously underestimated her capacity for vindictive pettiness. Within a week of my community meeting, she launched what I can only describe as an intimidation campaign that would impress a crime boss. First came the architectural review violations. My mailbox, the same standard brown post and box that had been there for 8 years, was suddenly non-conforming to community standards. Apparently, the HOA had quietly updated the approved mailbox specifications, and mine was now 4 inches too tall and the wrong shade of brown. Then my driveway got cited for an oil spot that measured roughly the size of a nickel. Never mind that Gary Harrington's driveway looked like an auto shop explosion, or that half the driveways in the neighborhood had similar marks from normal vehicle maintenance. But Diana's real genius was in the whisper campaign. She started making casual comments to neighbors about my concerning behavior and aggressive attitude toward women in authority. Nothing actionable, nothing you could prove, just poison dripped into casual conversations at the mailbox. Rosa. Martinez told me she'd overheard Diana at the supermarket suggesting that my association with troublemakers could affect other homeowners standing with the board. The smell of fresh produce apparently couldn't mask the stench of Diana's manipulation, so I decided to fight fire with facts. As a homeowner, I had the legal right to review HOA financial records. Most people don't know this, but every homeowner association is required to make their books available for inspection. It took 4 written requests and a threat to involve an attorney, but Diana finally grudgingly provided access. What I found in those records was fascinating. And by fascinating, I mean potentially criminal $16,000 in landscaping improvements over the past 18 months. All paid to Harrington Contracting, Gary's company. No bids, no approvals from the general membership, just checks cut to the chairwoman's husband for vaguely described community enhancement projects. I spent a weekend mapping out every expense, cross-referencing with actual improvements visible in the neighborhood. The math didn't add up. Either Gary was the most expensive landscaper in the state, or someone was treating the HOA budget like their personal checking account. Detective Martinez had been attending board meetings, taking notes in that methodical cop way that makes guilty people sweat. When I showed him the financial discrepancies, his eyebrows went up. 16 grand for landscaping, huh? He flipped through his meeting notes. I don't remember voting on any major landscape projects. That's because there weren't any votes. Diana approved them all as routine maintenance. Routine maintenance doesn't usually cost more than a decent car. Meanwhile, the community was beginning to organize itself. Rosa had created a childcare cooperative, which sounds innocent enough until you realize it meant parents were talking, sharing stories, comparing notes about Diana's behavior. Mrs. Chen started hosting coffee gatherings where longtime residents shared memories of what the neighborhood used to be like. These weren't protests or organized resistance, just neighbors being neighborly. But it was exactly the kind of thing that threatened Diana's control. Her response was predictable and petty. She called county code enforcement on my work van parked in my own driveway. The van was legally parked, properly registered, no violations, but it forced me to take a day off work to deal with the inspector who showed up looking apologetic and clearly annoyed at having his time wasted. "Sir, there's nothing wrong with this vehicle," he told Diana when she appeared to observe the inspection. "It's a work truck parked at the owner's residence, perfectly legal." That night, as I was helping Daniel with his science homework, he looked up at me with those serious 12-year-old eyes. "Dad, why can't we go swimming anymore? How do you explain petty tyranny to a child? How do you tell your son that some adults never outgrow playground bullying? They just get better at hiding it behind rules and procedures. We'll figure it out, buddy," I promised. "Sometimes adults make things complicated, but we'll find a way." Sophia, eavesdropping from the kitchen, chimed in with teenage directness. "It's because Mrs. Harrington is being mean, right? Jessica's mom says she's trying to make people move away." Kids cut right through the nonsense and see the truth adults try to dress up in fancy language. That Sunday morning, I stood at the locked gate, watching other families drive to parks and lakes 30 minutes away for activities we used to enjoy in our own backyard. The sound of that padlock clicking as I tested it one more time wasn't just frustrating. It was heartbreaking. But standing there, watching my children's childhood being stolen by someone's power trip, I made a decision. This wasn't just about property rights anymore. This was about ensuring Daniel and Sophia grew up knowing that bullies don't always win, That sometimes the good guys fight back and actually succeed. I just needed to figure out how. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen at 1:30 a.m. when you're running on coffee fumes and stubborn determination. That's when I was hunched, over my laptop, diving deeper into property records than any rational person should at that hour. The blue glow of the screen was giving me a headache, but I couldn't stop. Something about the original subdivision documents was bothering me. I'd been cross-referencing the 1997 plat maps with current property tax records, looking for any leverage, any loophole, any technicality that might help our case. Most of it was standard stuff: lot lines, setbacks, utility easements. But then I noticed something odd about the lake access path itself. The parcel number didn't match. Every lot in Pine Ridge had a clear parcel designation tied to individual, homeowners, or the HOA. But the lake access path, the specific strip of land where Diana had installed her fence, had a different designation entirely. Not HOA property, not private property, something else. I pulled up the county assessor's database and started tracing that parcel number through decades of records. What I found made me sit back in my chair and whistle low enough not to wake. The kids. The lake access path was built on a separate parcel that was never actually owned by the HOA. According to the records, the original developer, Pine Ridge Properties LLC, had retained ownership of that specific strip along with a small section of shoreline and even a tiny island about 40 yards out. The plan, documented in a 1998 letter I found buried in municipal files, was to eventually sell or donate the land to the city for a public park. But Pine Ridge Properties went bankrupt during the 2009 financial crisis. When companies dissolve without properly disposing of assets, those assets revert to the county land bank, which meant that for the past 14 years, the land Diana was trying to control wasn't even hers to control. The fence she'd installed, with such ceremony, was sitting on county property without permits, without permission. Technically, it was illegal. But here's the beautiful part, the part that made me actually laugh out loud at 1:52 a.m. while my neighbors slept peacefully in their beds. The county land bank sells these orphaned parcels to recover administrative costs, usually for pennies on the dollar. I found the listing buried on a government website that looked like it was designed in 1999. Parcel 52C147 MISC. 0.4 acres includes 180 FT lakefront access and small island. Minimum bid, $18,500. $18,500 for the land that controlled access to our entire lake. For the strip of property that Diana thought she owned, thought she could fence off, thought she could use to manipulate an entire community. I had $21,000 in my emergency savings account, money I'd been saving for the kids' college, for unexpected repairs, for someday. But what's more important than your children's right to grow up free from petty tyrants? The bidding process was surprisingly straightforward. No complicated procedures, no political connections required, just an application, a certified check, and a willingness to wait 8 weeks for bureaucratic wheels to turn. But I didn't stop there. If I was going to buy this land, I needed to understand everything about it. Environmental surveys, water rights, any restrictions or easements. I spent the next 4 days calling every relevant government office, learning more about wetland regulations and shoreline management than most people know in a lifetime. The environmental assessment alone was eye-opening. Diana's fence installation had damaged natural drainage patterns. The concrete footings were disrupting water flow, creating minor erosion issues that could become major problems. If anything, the fence was actually creating the safety hazards Diana claimed to be preventing. While I was researching, planning, and preparing, Diana was getting more desperate. Paul, the treasurer, had started asking uncomfortable questions about financial transparency. Rosa's informal neighborhood network was growing stronger. Even some of Diana's traditional allies were beginning to express private doubts. But Diana still had no idea what was coming. As far as she knew, she held all the cards. She had the lock, she had the key, she had the authority. She was about to learn that authority without legitimacy is just bullying with paperwork. The irony was perfect. Diana thought she was securing her power by fencing off the lake. Instead, she'd given me the motivation and the roadmap to take that power away completely. Every great comeback has a moment when the underdog realizes they're not actually the underdog. This was mine. You know what they say about the best laid plans? While mine involved takeout pizza, way too much coffee, and a kitchen table covered in so many legal documents, it looked like a law firm had exploded. First call was to my sister Michelle, who's a real estate attorney up in Portland. Picture this conversation happening at 5:30 a.m. on a Saturday while I'm standing in my kitchen in pajama pants, surrounded by property surveys. Like, hypothetically, if someone wanted to buy county land bank property, how quickly could that happen? Hypothetically? Or are you about to do something that's going to give mom anxiety attacks? The second one. Michelle laughed, but she walked me through the process. Application, environmental review, title search, closing, 8 to 10 weeks, if everything went smoothly. The county wants these orphaned properties off their books, so they're motivated sellers. Next, I needed a team. Not some dramatic heist movie situation. Just neighbors who were tired of Diana's nonsense and had specific skills I could use. Detective Martinez was obvious. Retired investigator, knows how to document evidence, understands legal procedures. Plus, he'd been taking notes at every board meeting, building what he called a pattern of behavior file on Diana's violations. Rosa Martinez brought community organizing skills. Teachers know how to manage groups, communicate clearly, and get parents mobilized when needed. She'd already proven that with her informal neighborhood network. Mrs. Chen was my historical expert. She'd lived here since the original development, knew every family story, every broken promise, every change from what the neighborhood was supposed to be. In community fights, institutional memory is powerful ammunition. And surprisingly, Paul, the treasurer, had been quietly reaching out. Poor guy was clearly uncomfortable with Diana's financial shenanigans, but didn't know how to push back without getting steamrolled. He needed backup, and I needed inside information. We started meeting Thursday nights at my kitchen table. The smell of pepperoni pizza and the sound of calculator keys clicking became the soundtrack of our rebellion. Michelle handled the legal framework remotely, explaining the land purchase process and making sure we didn't miss any procedural requirements. Turns out buying county property requires environmental impact assessments, surveys, and title insurance. But it's all standard stuff if you know what you're doing. The key thing, Michelle explained during one of our 6 a.m. phone calls, is documentation. The county wants to know you're not going to flip the property or cause environmental damage. Show them a solid plan for community benefit, and they'll fast-track your application. Detective Martinez was building the case for Diana's pattern of violations. HOA bylaws, state regulations, environmental permits. She'd cut corners everywhere. It's like watching someone rack up speeding tickets while robbing a bank, he said, flipping through his files. Death by 1,000 paper cuts. Rosa coordinated the community support strategy. Not protests or confrontations, just making sure people knew what was really happening. Her teacher network was spreading the word to other neighborhoods dealing with similar HOA problems. Apparently, Diana-style tyrants are more common than you'd think. Mrs. Chen was documenting the original vision for our community. Letters from the developer, early homeowner meetings, promises made during sales presentations. They sold us a family neighborhood, she said, her voice firm despite her 70-plus years. Not some sterile investment property. The environmental survey was actually encouraging. The land was classified as enhanced recreational use property, perfect for community access. Diana's fence was the environmental problem, disrupting natural water drainage and damaging native plant communities. Our timeline was tight but manageable. Land purchase applications submitted by month end. Environmental permits for fence removal. Because yes, taking down an illegal fence on your own property still requires paperwork. Media strategy in case Diana tried to spin this as some kind of hostile takeover. The financial side was straightforward. My $21,000 emergency fund would cover the land cost plus legal fees. Michelle was handling the transaction pro bono because, as she put it, Diana Harrington sounds like every HOA chairwoman I've ever wanted to see taken down a peg. But the most important part of our strategy was patience. Diana had no idea what was coming. She was still operating under the assumption that she controlled the situation. that her fence and her rules were permanent facts of neighborhood life. Let her keep thinking that. Every Thursday night, as we cleaned up pizza boxes and filed away another week's worth of preparation, I felt like we were building something bigger than just a property transaction. We were building a community that could stand up to bullies, that understood its rights, that wouldn't be intimidated by fancy titles and manufactured authority. The taste of pepperoni and the texture of legal documents under my fingers became the flavor and feel of hope. We were going to win this thing. We just had to be smarter, more patient, and more thorough than Diana had ever bothered to be. "You know what the best part is?" Rosa said one night as we wrapped up. "She's doing this to herself. Every violation, every shortcut, every abuse of power, it's all going to come back to bite her." Detective Martinez nodded, closing his evidence folder. "In police work, we call that building your own case. Diana's been the prosecutor, judge, and jury for so long, she forgot other people might be keeping score. 8 weeks. We just had to keep our heads down and our documentation organized for 8 more weeks. 5 weeks into our land purchase process, Diana's paranoia radar started pinging. She couldn't figure out what we were up to, but she knew something was happening. The neighborhood felt different, more organized, more confident, less afraid of her disapproval. Her response was to double down on petty harassment with the dedication of someone who'd made tyranny their full-time job. My grass got measured with a ruler. Not kidding. Diana showed up with an actual measuring device because my lawn was allegedly 3.2 inches tall, and the HOA limit was 3 inches. She took photographs of the ruler against individual grass blades like she was documenting a crime scene. "I'm just ensuring compliance," she announced to my neighbor Frank, who was washing his car and trying not to laugh. Property standards depend on consistent enforcement. But Frank's car was sitting in a puddle of soapy water running into the storm drain. And somehow that didn't merit measurement or documentation. Funny how Diana's eagle eye for violations was so selective. The real escalation came when she discovered I was up to something through her network of busybody informants. Jennifer, the secretary, had spotted me making multiple trips to the county office building. Someone else saw me having coffee with Detective Martinez. Rosa's increasing confidence at neighborhood gatherings was making Diana nervous. So Diana decided to get creative with sabotage. First, she filed an anonymous complaint about my business license, claiming I was running a commercial operation out of my house because my work van was parked in the driveway. The city inspector who showed up looked embarrassed as he explained that someone had alleged I was operating an unlicensed plumbing business from my residence. "Sir, you're clearly licensed, your truck registration is current, and parking a work vehicle at your home isn't a violation of anything," he said, checking boxes on his clipboard with obvious reluctance. "I have to follow up on all complaints, but this is pretty clearly a neighbor dispute rather than a code issue." Diana watched from her kitchen window, probably disappointed that I wasn't being led away in handcuffs. Next, she tried to pressure Paul into approving an emergency assessment of $750 per household for enhanced community security measures. This was her attempt to squeeze money out of everyone while making it look like she was responding to some urgent threat. Paul, bless his heart, had finally found his backbone. "What kind of security threat requires a $107,250 emergency expenditure?" he asked during the board meeting. "And why wasn't this discussed with the community first?" "The board has discretionary authority for emergency expenditures," Diana snapped. "Actually," Detective Martinez said from the audience, consulting his notes, "according to the bylaws, emergency expenditures over $15,000 require homeowner approval, unless there's an immediate threat to life or property." What's the immediate threat here? You could practically see the steam coming out of Diana's ears. The threat is community disruption by individuals who refuse to respect proper authority. Translation: the threat was people asking inconvenient questions. But Diana's most vindictive move was calling my ex-wife. Maria and I have been divorced for 4 years, but we co-parent effectively. The kids go back and forth, we split expenses, we don't drag each other through unnecessary drama. So, when Maria called me confused and concerned, I knew Diana had crossed a line. "Ryan, I got this strange call from someone in your neighborhood," Maria said. "She said there were concerning community tensions and that it might not be a safe environment for Sophia and Daniel right now. What's going on?" I explained the HOA, Situation? The fence, Diana's escalating harassment. Maria listened, then sighed. So basically, your HOA chairwoman is trying to use our children as leverage in her power trip. That's about the size of it. Yeah, that's not happening. The kids love that house, they love the lake, and they're not going anywhere because some woman is having a control freak meltdown. Maria's support meant more than I'd expected. It also meant Diana had seriously miscalculated. Trying to weaponize custody concerns against a devoted father was the kind of overreach that makes enemies out of neutral parties. Meanwhile, my phone was buzzing constantly with updates from neighbors. Diana had approached Mrs. Patterson, our sweet 79-year-old neighbor who still bakes cookies for the mail carrier, with concerns about whether she could really maintain her property standards at her age. Mrs. Patterson's response, according to Rosa, who witnessed it, was priceless. Honey, I was maintaining property standards when you were still figuring out which end of a hedge trimmer was which. Mind your own business. Even some of Diana's traditional supporters were getting uncomfortable. Her escalating harassment was making everyone nervous about becoming targets themselves. The smell of fear was thick in the air during neighborhood encounters. Not fear of Diana's authority, but fear of her unpredictability. 4 weeks left on the land purchase timeline. Diana still had no idea what was really coming, but she could sense her control slipping. Desperate people make stupid mistakes, and Diana was definitely getting desperate. Every morning when I walked past that locked gate, hearing the metal fence, posts humming slightly in the wind, I felt like a runner in the final stretch of a marathon. The finish line was close enough to taste, and it tasted like sweet, sweet justice. 3 weeks before my land purchase closed, Diana went completely nuclear. I'm talking scorched earth, burn it all down, if I can't win, nobody can nuclear. It started with another emergency board meeting. This time, the alleged emergency was a credible security threat to the community. Diana had somehow convinced herself, or was pretending to believe, that the growing opposition to her leadership constituted actual danger. Recent activities by certain residents have created an atmosphere of hostility and potential violence, she announced to the 6 people who showed up to her hastily called meeting. For the safety of all homeowners, we need to implement enhanced security protocols. Enhanced security protocols turned out to mean banning me from all common areas, including the walking paths and mailbox cluster. According to Diana's new emergency powers resolution, I was now considered a trespassing threat if I set foot anywhere outside my own property line. Detective Martinez, who'd been documenting everything, just shook his head. You can't ban a homeowner from common areas without due process, he said. This isn't legal, it's not enforceable, and it's definitely not smart. The board has emergency authority to protect community welfare, Diana shot back. The board has 3 members and you're only one of them, Paul replied. He'd really found his courage over the past month. I never voted for this, and neither did Jennifer. That's when we learned that Jennifer had quietly resigned as secretary 3 days earlier. Apparently, even Diana's most loyal supporter had limits, and threatening to call police on neighbors for walking their dogs had crossed them. But Diana wasn't done. If she couldn't control the HOA legally, she'd control it through fear and intimidation. Anonymous flyers started appearing on doorsteps and car windshields. Professional printing, not some home computer job. Concerned neighbors. Alert. Resident. Under investigation for aggressive behavior and financial irregularities. No specific allegations, no sources, just enough innuendo to make people nervous. The flyer suggested that I was under investigation by authorities and that families should take appropriate precautions for their safety. Pure fiction, but designed to isolate me from community support. Rosa found one stuck under her windshield wiper at the grocery store. This is insane, she texted me. She's literally making stuff up now. But Diana's most vindictive move was targeting the kids. She called Pine Ridge Elementary, where Sophia and Daniel attended school, suggesting that there were family stressors that might affect their safety and academic performance. She recommended that the school counselor check in with my children to ensure they weren't being negatively impacted by ongoing family instability. I found out about this when Sophia came home from school confused and upset. Dad, why did Mrs. Rodriguez want to talk to me about whether I felt safe at home? She asked. I told her you're the best dad ever, but she kept asking weird questions about stress and fighting. That's when I saw red. You can come after me. You can harass me. You can make my life difficult. But the moment you involve my children in your power games, you've crossed a line that can't be uncrossed. I called the school immediately and spoke with the principal, who was clearly uncomfortable about the whole situation. After I explained what was really happening, the HOA dispute, Diana's escalating harassment, the complete lack of any family problems, the counselor visits stopped. But the damage to my children's sense of security was done. Daniel asked me that night if we were going to have to move because the mean lady doesn't want us here anymore. How do you explain to a 12-year-old that sometimes adults become so drunk on tiny amounts of power that they lose all perspective on what's actually important? Meanwhile, Diana was making one final push to change the neighborhood demographics before her authority evaporated completely. Mrs. Patterson told Rosa that she'd received a generous cash offer from an unnamed investor who was looking to upgrade properties in transitioning neighborhoods. 4 other elderly homeowners had received similar contacts. All cash offers, all significantly above market value, all contingent on quick closings before market conditions changed. Diana was trying to flip the community composition in her favor, pushing out longtime residents and replacing them with people who'd be grateful for her strong leadership and property value protection. But her timing was terrible. The community was more unified against her than ever. People were sharing information, supporting each other, documenting every violation and overreach. Even Gary Harrington looked embarrassed when he picked up their mail, avoiding eye contact with neighbors who used to be friends. The smell of autumn leaves burning in someone's backyard mixed with the bitter taste of anticipation as I counted down the days to closing. Diana's desperation was making her sloppy, vindictive, and increasingly isolated. She was playing a game where she thought she still held all the cards, not realizing that the deck had already been shuffled. 2 weeks left. 14 more days of Diana's emergency powers and manufactured authority. 14 more days of my children asking why they couldn't play by the lake, where their grandfather had taught me about construction decades ago. Then the real emergency would begin. Diana's emergency. Because she was about to discover that all her fences, all her locks, all her little kingdom of petty rules had been built on land that was never hers to control, and I was about to become the person holding the only key that mattered. Saturday morning, 8:30 a.m., the traditional community fishing time that Diana had tried so hard to kill. But this Saturday was different. This Saturday, 31 families showed up at the locked fence. Despite Diana's threats, despite her emergency powers, despite her warnings about trespassing and police involvement, word had spread through Rosa's network, through Mrs. Chen's coffee gatherings, through the simple fact that people were tired of being bullied in their own neighborhood. Parents brought fishing rods, kids brought bikes, grandparents brought folding chairs. It looked like a community picnic, except for the 10-foot steel fence blocking access to what should have been our shared space. The smell of fresh coffee from thermoses mixed with morning dew on the grass as neighbors gathered, chatting quietly, waiting to see what would happen next. I stood near the gate with my tackle box, just like any other Saturday for the past 8 years, except my heart was hammering and my mouth tasted like copper pennies. At 8:45, right on schedule, Diana arrived, in her pearl-white sedan followed by a police cruiser. She'd brought her brother-in-law, Officer Rick, who looked about as enthusiastic as someone attending their own root canal. And then, perfect timing, Channel 9's news van pulled up. The reporter was Jessica Chen, no relation to our Mrs. Chen, but she'd been following up on community interest stories. Something about neighborhood tensions over lake access had caught her attention. Diana strutted over to the crowd like she was about to conduct a mass arrest, her heels clicking on the asphalt with that sharp staccato that meant business. She had a manila folder clutched against her chest, probably more of her manufactured emergency documentation. "This is an illegal assembly on private property," she announced loud enough for the news camera to pick up. "Officer Martinez, please. Inform these people they need to disperse immediately or face trespassing charges." Officer Martinez looked at the crowd of families with fishing poles and coffee cups, then looked at Diana, then looked like he wanted to be anywhere else on Earth. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "I need to see documentation of your authority to restrict access to this area before I can take any enforcement action." That's when I stepped forward, pulling the folded documents from my jacket pocket, the same pocket where I'd been carrying them every day for a week, waiting for this exact moment. "Officer Martinez, I think there might be some confusion about who actually has authority here," I said, unfolding the county land deed with its official seal and signatures. "As of yesterday afternoon, I'm the legal owner of this property." The sound of 31 families collectively holding their breath was like the moment before a thunderclap. Diana's face went through about 7 different expressions in 4 seconds. Confusion, disbelief, anger, panic, and finally a kind of desperate denial that was almost painful to watch. "That's impossible," she said, but her voice had lost its commanding tone. "This is HOA common property. The board controls all common areas." "Actually," I said loud enough for everyone to hear, including the news camera, "this was never HOA property. It belonged to the county land bank, and as of 3:00 p.m. yesterday, I purchased it legally and completely." I handed the deed to Officer Martinez, who studied it with the careful attention of someone who really didn't want to make a mistake on camera. "This appears to be legitimate," he said. "Sir, you're saying you own this land and the fence?" "I own the land. The fence was installed without permits on county property, which means it's been illegally trespassing for the past 4 months. That's when Diana completely lost it. "You can't do this," she screamed loud enough that dogs probably heard her 4 blocks away. "This is manipulation. This is fraud. You stole community property." "Actually," Detective Martinez said, stepping up with his own folder of documents, "the only theft here has been your systematic embezzlement of HOA funds. $16,000 to your husband's company for non-existent landscaping projects. Would you like to explain that to Officer Martinez?" Paul, the treasurer, who had been silent through most of this, finally found his voice. "I have the financial records," he said quietly. "Diana, you need to stop talking." But Diana was beyond reason, beyond strategy, beyond any hope of maintaining dignity. "You people don't understand what you're doing. Property standards, community values, you're destroying everything." Jessica Chen from Channel 9 stepped forward with her microphone. "Ma'am, are you the HOA chairwoman? Can you comment on allegations of financial mismanagement?" That's when I delivered the line I'd been rehearsing in my head for weeks. "There's no mismanagement to comment on," I said, looking directly into the camera. "As the new owner of this property, I'm donating permanent public access to this lake for all community members. No fees, no restrictions, no appointments necessary, the way it was always supposed to be." The cheer that went up from 31 families echoed across the water. Kids started running toward the shoreline before their parents could stop them. Mrs. Chen was crying happy tears. Even Officer Martinez was smiling. Diana stood there in her perfect outfit with her perfect hair, watching her little kingdom collapse in real time. The fence that was supposed to establish her control had become the symbol of her downfall. "The fence comes down today," I announced. "I have environmental permits, proper tools, and enough neighbors willing to help that will be fishing by lunchtime." And that's exactly what happened. By noon, 10 sections of ornamental steel fencing were carefully stacked by the road, Diana's barriers transformed into scrap metal. The concrete footings would take longer to remove, but the path was open. The taste of victory was sweeter than I'd imagined, but the real satisfaction came from watching my children run to the water's edge. Daniel whooping with joy as he cast his line for the first time in months. 4 months later, you'd never recognize our little corner of the world. That first Saturday after the fence came down, we had the biggest community fishing event in Pine Ridge's history. Word had spread. Beyond our neighborhood, the Channel 9 story went viral, picked up by morning shows and social media accounts dedicated to justice-served content. Suddenly, we were the poster child for standing up to HOA tyranny. But the real changes were quieter and more meaningful than internet fame. Daniel caught his first base from the restored shoreline on a sunny November morning, grinning so wide I thought his face might split. Sophia brought 4 friends over for a lake day that turned into an impromptu neighborhood block party. The sound of children's laughter echoing across the water became our new normal, the way it was always supposed to be. I kept my promise about permanent public access, working with a local attorney to establish a conservation easement that protects the lake access in perpetuity. No future Diana can ever fence it off again. The legal paperwork tasted like freedom and smelled like victory. We restored the native plants around the shoreline, turning Diana's environmental damage into a teaching opportunity. Mrs. Chen led a committee documenting the lake's natural history, creating educational signs that explain the local ecosystem to visiting families. What started as property rights became environmental stewardship. The community transformation went deeper than just lake access. Rosa's informal networks became the foundation for a completely restructured HOA, one with transparency requirements, term limits, and actual accountability to homeowners. The new bylaws include what everyone now calls the Diana Rule. No single person can hold multiple board positions or serve more than 2 consecutive terms. Detective Martinez was elected as our new chairwoman, running on a platform of boring competence and radical transparency. Board meetings went from Diana's one-woman shows to actual discussions where neighbors could ask questions without fear of retaliation. The taste of democracy in a homeowners association was surprisingly refreshing. Paul, the treasurer, finally found his backbone permanently. The financial audit he ordered revealed that Diana's husband Gary had been systematically overcharging for services while under-delivering on actual work. The HOA recovered $11,200 in settlement, which we used to fund a community improvement fund managed by residents, not board members.